Hello everyone and welcome to our very first lesson on Intro to Trigonometry. I know that sounds like a scary word, so we just shorten it. We're going to nickname this Trig. You will take a class one day called Algebra 2 with Trig, and this is the first time that you're getting an introduction to it. And so what we're going to be doing today is labeling our opposite piece, our adjacent piece, and our hypotenuse. So the word opposite is going to imply that this is going to be a side that lies across from an angle. Adjacent is going to imply that it's going to be, this implies that it's going to be next to, the side length that is next to an angle. And then remember that just like before, just like we've been doing with Pythagorean theorem, the hypotenuse is always going to be the longest side. And remember that in a right triangle, the longest side is always going to be across from the right angle. So just like before, our hypotenuse is still our C value, and then our adjacent and our opposite are going to be the A and B values. And so let's look at a few pictures, because this takes a little bit of practice. What is my angle? My angle that's highlighted or indicated is this one right here. So we're always going to be going from one of these acute angles. Remember that acute angle is measured less than 90 degrees. So we're not going to be going from my right angle. We're always going to be approaching this triangle from either the yellow angle or from the pink angle. And in this picture, we're approaching it from the yellow angle. So from the yellow angle, the side that is across from or opposite to this side length is going to be this one. So sometimes we will abbreviate that OPP. We're just going to go ahead and abbreviate with an O. That's our opposite. The other shorter one that's touching it is going to be our adjacent. That's next to it. This side length is next to this angle. And then, of course, we have our hypotenuse is our longest piece. Our hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. We're going to label that with an H for hypotenuse. Okay. Opposite is O, adjacent is A, hypotenuse is H. So let's see what changes. We can approach this triangle from one of two ways, either from this blue angle that is acute or from this yellow angle that is also acute. So let's see what changes and let's see what stays the same. In both of these triangles, this is my hypotenuse, no matter what. That never changes. So that's always my H. Okay. That is also true in this triangle. This is still my hypotenuse. So what changes? Well, from the blue triangle, the one on the left, the one across from it is going to be opposite, and the one next to it is going to be adjacent. So it's touching it. From my yellow triangle, the one that is going to be opposite is going to be this one. The one that is going to be adjacent is going to be this one. So my perspective changes. I kind of look at it like an eyelid. From this blue eyelid, the way that this angle views this triangle, the green piece is opposite. From this yellow eyelid, the way that this person views this triangle, their green is opposite. So the opposite and the adjacent switched, depending on which acute angle you're viewing it from. The hypotenuse always stays the same. So let's start and let's practice. Here's my highlighted angle, so you're always going to go from that angle. In number 1, it says label the parts of the triangle. And so let's label it. I always start with my opposite piece. What is opposite to this angle? That's this one. What is always my hypotenuse? It's always this one. And then here is my adjacent. So we have opposite the angle, we have adjacent to the angle, and then we have the hypotenuse. So what changes for number 2? Well, now I'm going from this angle right here. What is my opposite? My opposite is going to be this piece right here. What is my hypotenuse? The longest one is going to be this piece. So what is my adjacent? What's left for my adjacent? The one that touches it is the adjacent. Okay, let's do 7 and 8. In number 7, we've got our angles right here. So who is opposite that angle? That would be this piece right here. The side length would be opposite. Who is always my hypotenuse? Always the longest one. And then what is left for my adjacent? This green piece would be my adjacent. Okay. If you wanted to, you could always start with your hypotenuse. That's another way you can do it if that's a little bit easier. So what is always my hypotenuse? My hypotenuse is always the one across from the right angle. So that's my hypotenuse. So all we have left is opposite and adjacent. And so here is my opposite piece. What does that leave for the last one? The adjacent piece. The adjacent piece is going to touch that angle. The opposite piece is not going to touch that angle. Okay, label the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse in the right triangle. So we're going to go from the angle that is listed. So let's go from the angle that is listed. From the 47, we have our hypotenuse is going to be here. It's the longest side. So what is my opposite? My opposite is going to be the 19. So what is my adjacent? What's left? The x. Opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. Let's do that again for number 2. I'm going to label the hypotenuse first every time. So here's my hypotenuse. From the 38-degree angle, the 15 is going to be my opposite, which means that the green piece is going to be my adjacent. Okay, so let's always start with the hypotenuse. I feel like that's going to go a little bit better. Here's my hypotenuse. From this angle, from the 63 degrees, what is my opposite? It's going to be this piece. So what does that leave for the last piece? The x is going to be my adjacent. Number 4, here's my hypotenuse. Here's the angle I'm going from, the 47-degree angle. So from 47, here's my opposite, which leaves this piece as the adjacent. All right, number 5, where's my hypotenuse? Let's always start with that. Here's my hypotenuse. So from the 50-degree angle, what is opposite? That'd be this piece. Then my hypotenuse was x. What is my adjacent? That would be the 16. Okay. All right. Again, we can use our colors. Here's my hypotenuse. The 13 is the biggest side. We're going from the 31-degree angle. So from the 31-degree angle, that forces this piece to be the opposite, which forces this piece to be the adjacent. So you can kind of tell it makes like a crocodile's mouth when it outlines the angle. This piece is always going to be eating the opposite. All right, so this is just getting us used to this. We're going to be practicing this a lot. Let's label the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse in these right triangles. So now it doesn't have angles, but we're still going to label. Here is my hypotenuse. Change colors. Here's my hypotenuse. So from this angle right here, we're going to approach it from the perspective of this angle, from this eyelid. From this angle, we've got our opposite would be this piece, which forces the adjacent to be this piece, because it's got a question mark for that angle. Okay, start again. Here's my hypotenuse. Okay, we're approaching the triangle from the perspective of this acute angle. So from that acute angle, what is my opposite? My opposite is going to be the 13. My adjacent side is going to be this green piece. All right, again, here's our hypotenuse. We are approaching this triangle from this yellow angle right here. So from that angle, what is my opposite? From that angle, the 8 is the opposite, which forces this other side to be the adjacent. All right, number 8. Where's my hypotenuse? Here, it's the biggest side in the triangle. That is my hypotenuse. I'm approaching this triangle from the question mark. So from that question mark, from that point of view, from that acute angle, this is going to be my opposite piece, which forces this to be my adjacent piece. All right, a few more. This is just has a mark instead of the question mark. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the hypotenuse on each of these. That will make it really fast. So essentially what we're having to do every time is decide which piece is opposite and which piece is adjacent, the angle that they mark. Okay, so there's my hypotenuse, just like we did for Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But now we are labeling these, the hypotenuse, the c value is always going to be an h, and then we're figuring out which piece is opposite and which piece is adjacent. So let's go find the angle that they're pointing to first. The angle that they're pointing to is this one right here. So what is opposite that angle? The 36, which forces the 27 to be the adjacent. Okay. Now they're pointing to this angle right here. So from this angle, this piece is opposite, which forces the 40 to be adjacent. From this purple angle, angle Z, this piece is going to be opposite, 15, which forces the 8 to be the adjacent piece. And then last but not least, from this angle Z, this piece is going to be opposite for 14, which forces the 48 to be adjacent. And so we're going to be practicing that this week. We're going to get that down before we start working on the trig. So opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. And just remember that for the opposite, the adjacent, and the hypotenuse, I'm going to draw this out. Here's my right triangle. I called this triangle A, B, C. And I put numbers on it, 3, 4, and 5. From angle A, my hypotenuse is always going to be the longest side of the triangle. It's across from the right angle. So there's my hypotenuse. It's the longest side. My opposite is always going to lie across from the angle that is marked. So that is going to be my opposite. And then my adjacent is always going to be that last side. Opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So adjacent means it's next to the angle in question. So we were talking about angle A here. So side BC is opposite angle A. Side AB is adjacent to angle A. And then side length AC is the hypotenuse in the triangle. Hope you're having a great day.